Ooh, what's going on, my marketing people? Welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Marketing podcast. Today, joining me is Steve Sinclair. He is the SVP of Product and Marketing at Mojo Vision. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jordan.
I'm excited to have you on and talk about a bunch of stuff. I know we got into a little bit offline about what you guys are doing with Mojo Vision, and then some of the challenges and what you have to do there. But I'm really interested to first hear your story and yeah, how did you find your way into this crazy world of marketing?
Well, like a lot of people that I've heard on your podcast talk about it, it wasn't a direct line. Obviously, I started off as an engineer and got a industrial engineering degree from Berkeley, and thought that that's what I wanted to do. And I worked as an industrial engineer for a couple of years, and then realized I wasn't really that good at it. And so I went back to school and got my MBA from Michigan, focused on operations and strategy, and worked for a few years as a quality systems manager. I was doing project management at a semiconductor company. And I enjoyed that, but that wasn't really it for me. I switched over and I was an IT manager for a couple of years, designing data warehouses, and that was fun, but again, not for me. And then I got the opportunity to jump over to a startup called Handspring. And Handspring, for the older listeners in the crowd, was building Palm OS PDAs, which eventually became smartphones, the first smartphones, like the Trio smartphone. And I worked my way within that small company through a number of different roles in manufacturing and IT. Eventually landed in the product management group and became a product manager for software, for email software, and was basically defining how people were going to use these newfangled smartphones in the early 2000s to communicate with each other. And that eventually turned into a hardware product management role. And I was working on definition of smartphones for hardware. And then I got a call from Apple, and they were just about ready to release a new product called the iPhone in 2007, and they were looking for a product manager for that. And so I jumped over to Apple, and was part of that revolution with the iPhone. I started off doing both product management and product marketing for iOS, in the early generations of the software that became iOS, and worked on features like FaceTime and Siri and iMessage. And then eventually shifted again over into hardware and began working on release of different hardware products. So I worked at Apple, for about 6 years, through definition of iPhone 6, and got a great experience on how to be both a product manager and a product marketer for a product. And I thought that was just invaluable experience. I then left there and I went to Motorola, which was part of Google at the time, and I became VP of product marketing. And I was responsible for shipment of a number of Android phones and Android smartwatches and other accessories from there. And then, you know, got great experience from an Android ecosystem perspective and understanding the challenges of that ecosystem vis-a-vis the iOS ecosystem. And then Lenovo bought Motorola, and I decided to switch gears and get some GM experience. So I went over to HP and I ran the commercial notebook business for a couple of years while I was there, and that was both a combined product management, product marketing role, and shipped a bunch of great commercial enterprise grade laptops. But that didn't really work for me either, being in the enterprise world. And so I eventually wanted to make the switch back to consumer. And that's when I discovered a little startup called Mojo Vision. It wasn't called that at the time, it was in stealth. This was about 5 years ago. And there were less than 20 people there. It was a bunch of PhDs and other high powered engineers that thought that they could reinvent the way that we consume information. And they had the audacious idea to create the world's first smart contact lens, basically to put augmented reality into a contact lens and be able to display that information in your eye. And they were looking for a product person who could lead that. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity to get in on the ground floor. The company was very young, and didn't have a really strong sense of what they wanted the product to be or what they wanted to do. They just were working on the tech to make it possible. And so it just was just opened my eyes to the possibilities of creating a whole new type of product and a whole new type of category. And I started off on the product definition side, but it was quickly apparent that the team needed marketing help. And so, I picked up some tips and tricks on how to be a marketer along the way. And so part of my role grew into being, essentially the CMO for the company as well. So I rebranded the company as Mojo Vision. A couple years in, I have been, leading the charge on how to explain this new technology to the world while we're building it, and to figure out how we invent a brand new category.
I love it. Now, from going, being on the front lines of innovation at Apple, Motorola with Google, and then being an enterprise. But all of those are, they're whales, right? They're massive companies. Talk to me a little bit about going from those ecosystems into stealth startup. Probably a bunch of people in a room with a box of pizza, and okay, now we got to make this go. Was there anything like, obviously a lot of those learnings you could come and apply systems thinking and how stuff that you would have learned at those companies, but was there any eye-opening moments where you're like, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore, like I'm not um in a big corporation anymore, like things are moving way faster, or anything like that? Any moments that stick out? I'd love to hear.
Well, I can't tell you how many of those moments there were. It was a daily deluge of those types of moments, from the fact that the support organizations that you normally have around you to do just the basic things, from web design to messaging design to video production, all of those things that you find in a big company, that there are pockets within your marketing communications teams that know how to do those things. They didn't exist, and I had to build all of those networks and all of those capabilities myself. Some of it we've built in house, but most of it has been, building out a network of really trusted vendors that I can depend on. That I was telling one of them the other day, you're in the car with me, and if I'm veering off the side of the road, you need to be able to tell me that, wake up, we got to get back on the road. And so I've got all these great partners with me that are on this journey, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do without their help, to make this happen. So having that support structure to build a marketing story and to communicate it is important, whether it's your Marcom agency or your PR agency or whatnot. But that was part of it. The other part of it is that you really do have a blank sheet of paper. There are no limits on what you can do, and you need to throw away the the preconceived notions that you have and the limitations you have when you join a large organization. Apple has a certain way of doing things, and that works for Apple, and Motorola had a certain way of doing things, and that worked for them, in that context. Here we had to create those things. I didn't have any of those rules, and so it made it really, it was very freeing, but it was also frightening at the same time to know that I could break a bunch of rules that were steadfast at these other places, and see what happens, see what mistakes I was going to make, and learn from those mistakes, which is a lot of fun.
I love it. Yeah, the embracing the chaos a little bit when you're in that startup. It's kind of like when a university professor, when they would give you a paper and they said write on anything you want versus hey, write on these three set topics, and that little fear of like I can write on anything I want, I could do anything, I could go completely into left field. Um, I'm with you on the startup side of things, and it's really cool to hear that. Now, as your role matured at Mojo, and as you got kind of deeper into it, and you're going, okay, we have this product, it's a game changer, I believe in it, but I need to communicate it out into the world. How are you approaching what category you fit in, or creating a new category? um, yeah, how have you really leaned into kind of pinpoint the communication of the product to the world? Has there been a lot of back and forth? Has it always been, hey, we know exactly who we are and what we're doing? Walk me through that process just from an outward communication standpoint.
Yeah. So, first you have to look inward, and we were in stealth. And so there wasn't, this strong push that we had to have an outward presence right away. Like we needed to get far enough along in our development process that we had something to show, and we had something real and tangible that people could relate to. And so part of it was a, a big part of what I did early on was define the plan of, here are the steps necessary from a product development perspective that we need to get through before I even want to, poke our heads up and tell people that we're working on this. So having those ideas in place of, well, it's got to be this type of demo, it's got to demonstrate these types of capabilities, and having a clear vision of what that was going to be was part of it. And then the second part of it, of course, was coming up with, who are we, and what do we stand for. And when you're building something like a smart contact lens that many people assume is 20 years away, and you're telling them it's going to be less than that, it's going to be a lot sooner than they think, you have to be thinking about what are people's reactions going to be? Are they going to have fearful reactions? Are they going to be, gleefully excited about it? Or is it somewhere in between? And how do you set yourself up for success in that situation where there's going to be a lot of different, really visceral reactions to what you're building? And so we had to think through all of those things while we were putting this together. I would say that, one of the tools that I used, or the book that I used that helped me with this, is a book called Play Bigger. And your audience can check that out. But it's a great roadmap for how do you do category design, and how do you think through what your category ought to be. Because when you're building something like a smart contact lens, it doesn't fit into any existing categories. It's not a smartphone. It's a wearable, but not the kind of wearable that people think of for health and fitness necessarily. It's a medical device, but it's not your typical medical device that you're buying and using just because you want it to do something from a medical perspective. So all of those things, together, you have to think of, well, it's this new thing. It's this new category. And we need to be able to define ourselves in a new category, tell people what that category is, and then prove to the world that we are the leaders of that category and can, deliver on what we promise. So early on, we came up with this concept of invisible computing is our category. This idea that we can get the information we want when we want it, and do it in a way that's natural, that's human, allows us to remain present in the world and interact with the people and the things in the world around us. And when the system is off, when the product is off, it disappears. It's invisible. And the idea that we can come in and out of getting the information that we want when we want it, and do that in a completely natural way, is what drives us. And so that's what invisible computing as a category for us really is all about, is to build these products that can enhance our lives by giving us the right information at the right time, but then disappear when we don't need them.
I love it. Now, is there a challenge communicating, or I guess, have you gone out and talked to people outside of tech forward markets? Because I know in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles, in New York, in Chicago, like, I understand it, and my abrasiveness to the tech is probably less than maybe in other parts, or less tech forward markets. Is that something that goes into the communication strategy as we start to think, okay, as this starts to expand, we have to really craft this narrative to make it approachable, nationwide? Or is it more so, hey, we're going to lean into tech forward markets, early adopters who would be willing to do this, and then we know the world's going to kind of catch up as we create this category? How do you balance those two aspects?
Yeah, that's a really good insight and a good question, because I've been thinking about this a lot for the last 5 years of how do you bring something like this that can be, a little too far ahead for some people, and how do you build out a narrative and a path that gets you to that point where it does become accepted. I mean, we don't question the fact that we're all carrying smartphones and looking at them and walking around with them and accessing them, throughout the day. We don't question when people are talking to appliances in their house anymore. But when those things all first came out, it was like, what is that? And why do you have it? And I don't have it. And why are you talking to it? And that seems weird. And so you have to just know that that's the way these things work out. It goes faster now than it used to, but it still happens in that same sort of progression. And so early on, we knew that we wanted to build a product and a company that had a purpose, and it wasn't just about getting information on your eyes whenever you wanted it. It had to be useful and utilitarian and benefit humanity in some way. And so one of the first use cases that we zeroed in on early with the company was to help people have low vision conditions. So say you have macular degeneration or glaucoma or retinitis pigmentosa. These are conditions where you're not blind, you can see the world, but contrast has been reduced, or you need to zoom in on things to really see the words that you want to see, or your mobility has been reduced certain times of the day because you're having trouble walking in bright sunlight, for instance. And so we're thinking to ourselves, well, we're building this lens that has augmented reality that we can overlay on the real world. What if we can use it to highlight things and to reveal things that people with low vision conditions otherwise wouldn't be able to see? And so we started working on how that could be incorporated in the early versions of the product. And we went to the FDA and we explained this to them, and they loved that idea. And so they gave us, we applied for it and were granted their breakthrough devices designation. And so that's become part of our identity, is to build a product that is an assistive accessibility type product to start with. And when people hear about that, when general consumers hear about a smart contact lens that could help people and help a certain population of people where tech is useful, that's helpful. That they see that, and it helps with the brand positioning. It helps with understanding who this is for to begin with, and it becomes a lot less threatening in that situation. And so one of our early customers are going to be people with low vision. It doesn't mean that we're not going to lean into people in tech forward situations. And in fact, one of our big pushes right now, and you'll hear more about that over the next 3 to 6 months, is for athletics and for sports enthusiasts who want to get data during an activity, whether they're training or they are using the device for maybe it's competition, but basically when they're working out and they want to get better. Imagine you're a runner and you've got all of your biometric stats in your eye, and you don't have to be looking at your watch, or you can be switching through your music, or you're getting tips and coaching while you're running, or it's helping you while you're a golfer, and just as you're teeing up, it's reminding you how you need to be standing, what your stance needs to be. That's something you can't do with a phone or a watch. So we're focusing on those during moments where it can really help you get better at the sport that you want to do. And we think that those folks are very tech forward and would be willing to pay for and adopt something like this.
Totally. That's and I mean I'm patient zero with that stuff. I'm the guy who's like, take all my metrics. I want to see them. I want to my run. My how's my heart rate throughout my run and everything, right? And I'm frantically checking my iWatch. But I love that initial positioning as, hey, we're here to assist people, and then setting that as the backbone, right? And then everything else that comes is good and an add-on and can be maybe a bigger e-commerce or a bigger commerce, side of the business, but ultimately having that backbone to fall on of saying, like, this is going to enhance and enrich people's lives, right? And that's like a rallying cry that I think anybody anywhere in the country can get behind, to be like, oh, I've been colorblind, or I have poor vision and I can't see, or driving at night, or all of those things that glaucoma, like you're talking about, and being able to help reduce the impacts of that, or help enhance the vision, I think is something that people will definitely get behind. And it's interesting from a product positioning standpoint, and then being able to go tell that story
We
out,
get
and then
well,
leading into those.
one of the challenges that I have is I own both the product definition side of this, and I own the product positioning and the company branding and that side of it. And I think that's somewhat unique, short of being a CEO, for a company like ours. For us, being really focused on the low vision market is going to help us to refine what that product can be for consumers. and give the market a chance to catch up, to understand what this thing can do and be. And at the same time, there's going to be other companies that come out with glasses, form factors for augmented reality, and that's all good. We like that idea that others are going to be building those form factors, and so people are going to get used to this sort of product idea being out in the market.
Yeah, I love this having to designate almost the rising tide raising all ships, right? So you have to push this message that rises the tide and just gets people that, hey, like, we are pro glasses and doing this and our tech, but then and selling the vision of the future and where the world is going to go. But then to your other side, it's like, but can our product go realistically in the next 5 years? And then, okay, what's that message? And almost not, you can't segment them because they are connected, but it's like you almost those two trains of thoughts, right? One being the vision, the other being the pragmatism, which I hate using the word pragmatism when we start talking about innovative and tech. But I think that, weighing those two is tough. It's very, very tough.
It is. And I spend a lot of my time working on that positioning. Like, so if you think about what we're building, there are a lot of ethical and privacy implications to building smart contact lenses that people are wearing everywhere. And we talk about it being invisible computing, and that has elements of or aspects that might not sit well with people about you have information, I don't have information, I can't tell that you have information. And so we have to think through those use cases, and we have to think through what's socially acceptable today, what's socially acceptable in the future, and make sure, again, that we don't get ahead of ourselves on what we try and do and what we try and give people the capability of doing. And so a lot of it has to come down to building out the roadmap for feature sets that have an ethical component to it, and understanding where there's a line, and that line is always moving, and it always will be moving, and having a process for evaluating where we build in capabilities over that timeline.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at things like the wealth gap, right? And then people, when we're developing tech and we go, okay, are we perpetuating that or not? But then you look at things like smartphones. There's more smartphones on the planet than there are toothbrushes right now. So like smartphones became acceptable or accessible at scale, right? And aren't something that fuel that divide. So then it's like, okay, I like this, like thinking about, okay, where are we positioned? How do we position? How do we make ethical decisions? So I absolutely love that. Steve, before I let you go, if anybody wants to learn about Mojo Vision, where should they head? And then two, if they want to connect with you, what's the best place to do so?
Well, if they want to find out about Mojo Vision, just come to our website, www.mojo.vision. And so there's all sorts of links to articles and content that we've created that explain what we do. Certainly, you can find us on social media as well. We're primarily on LinkedIn and Twitter, and so we have a pretty active set of posting that we do there now that we're out of stealth. If you want to connect with me, best place is LinkedIn, and you'll find me there. And happy to connect in any type of capacity. Certainly I live in the augmented reality world today, but we also have a lot going on in sports and fitness, a lot certainly in medical, ophthalmology, optometry. And so there's just a lot of places to find us.
Amazing. Listeners, you heard it there. Go connect with Steve on LinkedIn. I'll make sure to put a link to both Mojo Vision, his LinkedIn, and to the book, which was Play Bigger, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, Play Bigger. So I will put that as well in the show notes. So go through, click that. Steve, thanks again for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right, everybody. That's it for this episode. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Shelton, and I'll catch you next time.